like the US announcing the position that currency that is global trade. What is going to be my second stage then? My second stage is going to talk to you about how the trend of the world as we see it right now is one that is very expansionary. So no matter what these guys argue, say it's going to go time to the trend itself is going to make that impossible. The first one is that we realize that the planet is very finite and very limited. Yet human beings are creatures that adapt to the point that we are expanding the resource capability of the planet itself. This is seen in things like reclamation of land from the sea to go to new mega cities. This is seen in things like discovering new resources and new energy sources in things like lithium, right? Nobody would have thought like a few decades back that we could use lithium to make cars and fool ourselves and fly ourselves out in space, right? But we're doing all of these things, the resources are being recycled and we are using the resources for more things. The second reason is that even if we want to run that, the world is going to shrink and because the planet is unsustainable. We think that there are things like space colonization that we are looking at right now, like people like Elon Musk and the Russians are people are literally in the space flight right now that needs resources out of space, like resources from the moon, resources from other planets. I think that we very well soon, like the next 20, 30 years, will be available to people on Earth. That means we are not going to be able to say Earth doesn't have enough oil to find what we need to do, so let's get back instead, let's not move to get liquid. It simply will not happen. Let me run you my third case. The third case as to why taxation will not happen is because for taxation to happen, there will need to be a pre-condemnation. The pre-condemnation is that people in the world, at least the majority of them, need to become latent, number one. And number two, they need to be not having access information simultaneously of what is happening in the global economy. That means then the taxation will become by surprise. That means probably the European economy will start collapsing, but people will need to know, like in the 1970s, we got the internet was on the rise. But we think this cannot happen for two reasons. The first is that the availability of information, right? Or the phenomenon of information stewardship that we have right now. These are things like information, these are things like we have it education curriculum all across the world, means that we get to know more about each other's economy. If you were to experience people in West Africa and Ghana are knowing that we are having deep debate about this. If the China is failing, people would let us know because we are in great and what's not. That means we get to form other forms of coalitions that will benefit us as countries even more, so we're going to rely on these other nations more if this nation is going to fail. The second reason why there is no coalition or taxation happen is that there is more accountability mechanisms. Look, if central banks are going to be so stupid and do very stupid things like not sustainable monetary policies like people want to run today, they simply will get flagged because people in Venezuela, for example, take over their government. If government mess up, we have no need to hold them accountable. Let me use 30 seconds to respond to OG. All the arguments about diseases simply don't make sense. The fact that we are advancing in health, the fact that we are able to bring about vaccines into the time thing in like 1 or 2, 3 months, and the fact that we are so brilliant into research, and we are like doing things like gene editing and all of these modifications, mean that health-wise and science-wise, the world is ahead ever best. And in the last 50 more years for us, we don't think this is going to make the entire global economy collapse and with taxation. Good to go.
All right, please mute yourself. Thank you.
I made a joke this afternoon that I was going to do this. Like, I had it in suspension, but I'm still going to do it that way. Up national. Okay, so do something aside. So I'm going to start my 3, 2, 1. So panel, opening opposition's biggest case is the fact that open opposition says that the problems that existed the last time there was this stagflation are not particular problems that exist now, and they believe that the current trend is not going to lead to that stagflation. We think that it's inherently implied because he cited, the first case he says, the cases of oil prices quadrupling at that time are cases that lead to the fact that, there was a stagflation. In similar trend, even if it's not particularly the same actor, we have similar major actors in today's world that are beginning to act in similar ways that are affecting global cases. We see how the Russia-Ukraine war has affected oil prices generally, and in turn has affected how it has affected every other economy whose lives are dependent largely on how they depend on, all of this oil and all of how these actors play out within those states. That's on one. On two, this guy says that, elsewise we are at our best, so they say that, their response to oil's case on how health issues or pandemic will grow out is that we are at our good best. We think this is taken out easily on the fact that the last time we had a major pandemic before COVID-19 was around 1918 when there was the Spanish flu. Between 1918 and 2019, there have been major and large health advancements or technological advancements which would have even prevented COVID-19 by their own trajectory. But that didn't mean that COVID-19 didn't happen. Even if they expected it, they didn't know what it is in particular. It means that at the end of the day, the way we move, that I will prove it because of my speech, means that we are most likely to have those kind of situations. I'm coming on. So, key things that you get from opening government in today's debate on one, already tells you about how high inflation looks like in this characterization and all of that. It tells you about the shift in biological system that is further made complex by the nature of climate change and climate issues. So, panel, note, opposition is most likely going to say that, there are already climate policies, climate agreements that try to solve all of these issues. And we think that it's a big lie to say that those are catered sufficiently enough for the problems of climate change because we have people not agreeing to these accords. We have major states coming to say that they do not agree. We see the likes of Trump saying that he's going to be pulled out of the Paris Agreement, which means that there are major cases of instances that climate change issues could be complicated. CEO, what's your case?
Okay, so if I prove to you that climate change would not lead to stagflation, then it's not.
So panel, at the end of the day, climate change is just one out of the many issues that we are showing as a trend that leads to this. Because this is, stagflation happening in 100 years is not just a thing of one case happening, it's a combination of many cases or many issues that come. On one, geopolitical wars. The war between the Eastern and Western bloc has exacerbated how societies have advanced and related within status quo. It means that there is a limit into how resources are accessed and used, and even when they are used, there's a limit into how they are creating growth in and of itself. So panel, we see a world where smaller states like Nigeria, Niger, Mali, Burkina Faso are limiting how they want to even align with issues of climate change and all of those. These states are saying that, we want to self-actualize, we want to utilize our resources, we don't want to sell them out. We see the case of lithium in Congo, the gold in Ghana, we see the case of Niger saying that they do not want to send uranium out to France. It means that these states are beginning to not want to trade this kind of resources that are scarce on the path that are needed. The major problem there is these states that are holding these resources are not necessarily having the ability to utilize the resources in itself, which means that the resources remain, most likely even low in most cases that they are, and the growth are not proportionally there. In the other hand, the people that have access to them, that is the people that can refine these resources to end products, have limited supply bond to actually supply to everybody, which means that the cost of these things go extremely high and are not accessible to people at large. Which means that on two places there is no growth particularly, and on the other place, the things that they are causing are causing. What's your case?
Your example just literally proves that people are hoarding now, so that in the event that there's an economic shock, there's going to be consistent production. So your example defeats your case.
So panel, clearly, even if these states are not particularly letting these people access their resources at large, one way or the other, even Nigeria still extract crude oil, but what they do instead is to do it in the likes of Dangote. It doesn't mean that they are not using oil. The key thing is these resources are still finite, and we believe the rate at which we are moving into this world, given that there are governments that are being called out on their accountability argument that Supan and trying to argue. Governments are being called out. It means that governments are being burdened, particularly in developing countries, to create better world of space for their people. It means that these resources being finite means that it gets to a point where the access to these resources become very, very limited, and the cost of accessing these resources very high, hence the stagflation in and of itself. On two, panel, we think that that argument is tied to the argument on protectionism and states protecting themselves within these circles. On three, I think that we think that military conflict is a major thing that is rising within countries that actually have resources in today's world. What military conflict do is that it allows states, particularly African states, to limit how they interact with major blocs. This is problematic, particularly because they do not have, the capacity to actually utilize the resources that they have. It becomes a problem in that the people that could help them utilize these resources, they have major conflict. We see Niger not wanting to relate with France, not because Niger can survive on its own, but because they know that, because they want to create that kind of bond or break away from imperialism. The problem with that is, finally, quick clarity is, we're not saying that when stagflation happens, even if it is hard to manage, there's going to be solutions at that time that they are going to prefer to them. It's not necessarily meaning that they are not going to provide solutions to them. It just stands that the progression of events in today and the combination of many things that are going key things you are getting from Ore and the extension that you are getting from me are the things that are going to eventually lead to this situation in itself. So key things you get from Mojo. One, the problem of climate change and how it affects how it affects the world at large and the resources that exist within them. Two, we get the issues of technological advancement and how this technological advancement is a point where they do not particularly, they affect things like, we get the idea of depletion of resources. Two, the geopolitical tensions that exist that increasing. We see Russia trying to show that it's a world power, and we see US that is trying to also exert that it's a power. This is going to continue over the next years, over the next decades that eventually are going to culminate into the struggles that we are going to get. On three, we're able to show you that given that climate issues are not going to be, people do not stick to climate policies, and we are having consistent issues of disaster, droughts, flooding, and all of those. We believe that this consistent trend is going to get to a point where we do not particularly have the ability to keep up, and we are going to reach a stagnation. Also, we believe that countries are, no matter first world, third world countries, are now relying heavily on debt. These debts are eventually going to get to a point where they are going to cause troubles for these states with this status quo. The fact that it is not front paper of many state newspapers doesn't necessarily mean it doesn't exist, because even the like of US are having increasing debt rates that they have to solve. To the extent where all these problems culminate and do not have an immediate solution, we believe that this is likely to happen in the next century, probably with the government.
Yeah, I'm looking at it. I've read it. Just confirm the audible. I don't know if it's connected, so I'm going to continue. Okay, I'll start my speech. Yeah, there's just so much movement behind you. Okay. I think that is a huge problem when government teams only decide that the way to argue a debate is to just prove problems exist. On our side, we don't think these problems exist. The motion clearly says that you need to articulate that these problems are going to create a certain kind of harm. On our side, what we're going to argue, and that's what Spanana told you, is that there exist mechanisms in place to ensure that in the occurrence of these problems, that we are not going to have a stagflation. The first thing I'm going to do is to reframe or recharacterize exactly what a stagflation looks like. And the info slide clearly tells you it is a rare economic phenomenon, right? Which means that the possibility of it occurring is unlikely. What it means is that you cannot just rely on the kind of analysis you get from opening governments to simply say, because there's climate change, because Trump pulled out of Paris climate deal, therefore there's going to be a stagflation. You need to prove that there's a degree of significant danger that is going to create that tipping point for a rare occurrence to want to occur in this instance. So, on our side, we do not think that there's no possibility that we're going to have a COVID-19 or that there's going to be some economic recession or whatever. But we don't think that there's likely going to be a stagflation. So let me then get into a couple of responses. I think the PM shoots themselves in the foot because our argument is not that major world issues are not likely to occur, but that there are issues that are not going to prevent them, or that there are mechanisms in place that are going to prevent them from occurring in a way that it creates a stagflation. And the analysis that you provide that you get from DPM already takes that when they say that countries are already starting to hoard resources. This largely buys into Spider-Man's argument, which is to say that, listen, the last time this sort of thing happened, we learned from it. So we created mechanisms that prevent us from, ensuring that these things don't happen. One of such mechanisms is what I'm going to be discussing. For example, things like quantitative easing didn't exist before the Great Depression in the past. It was only after that central banks learned that we could do things like quantitative easing. It could be okay for states to react and to actually print new money. It could be okay for states to react and sell government securities. It could be okay for states to react and try to inject liquidity, even if this means artificial liquidity. Because you must understand that the stagflation is not just an economic phenomenon. It also has a political undertone. So the way the political class is likely to respond to this issue determines whether it gets created or doesn't get created. What we say is that the people who do not have the power are people who are too selfish to allow this sort of thing to occur in the first instance. Because you buy into all of the analysis. The people who are in power are the people who have investments in Elon Musk, SpaceX. They're the people who want to be able to travel to space. They're the people who want to be able to live a life without acid rain and the likes of them. We think that we can weaponize that selfishness that exists on their part to ensure that these individuals are going to make the correct policies that prevent any sort of economic stagflation from being able to occur. But the second thing I'm going to talk about is just why I think that there exists too much global interconnectedness for these sort of things to happen. I think that the global economic interconnectedness we have right now is one that reduces the risk of stagflation by facilitating a number of things. One is trade and investment. Again, buy into open government analysis. The argument here is to say that countries are beginning to cherry pick where they deal with. The point I'm going to then do is to flip that analysis and simply tell you that these countries are making decisions based on metrics that ensure that they don't suffer by making bad investments. So, for example, the reason why you don't see people actually putting their weight right now with Russia is because everybody sees that you're making a mistake and we don't want to go down with you, so we're actually going to choose a better option, right? We think that individuals are able to make trade and investment decisions that are suitable for their own economies. What the impact of this case is that the worst case scenario you have is that a war between Ukraine and Russia swallows Russia, literally. So Russia might have that, but the debate is about a global stagflation, that this occurs on a global scale. There are 193 countries in the world, guys. It simply means that you need at least 50% of the whole world to go under for you to have the kind of issue that this debate is talking about. And that's why the debate says it is rare. So even if you have one country capitulate, that's not a stagflation, right? That's one country only having it. But their own analysis proves that it is unlikely that every country in the world, at least a majority of countries in the world, are going to allow themselves to get to a point where an economic depression brings the majority of countries downwards. Sure.
So because of the interconnectivity of global structures, it means that when powerful countries and hegemonies have this stagflation, it's going to transfer to other economies engage.
That's again an assertion you have 14 minutes to prove. What you already said is that countries are hoarding materials. You literally use Congo, which is like a developing nation, to say that they're hoarding materials right now and not willing to sell to the US. Now you're asking me a plan and saying that everything that happens in the US is going to affect Congo. No, the fact that we're Africans doesn't mean we're stupid. These individuals already know that there's a likelihood of things like this happening. Everybody saw that the war was going to create a global food crisis, and African nations that are sensible started investing in agriculture. Everybody knows how to respond to these things. You can't just assume that our leaders are stupid because they're Africans. I agree, but not now. The last thing that we're going to talk about is just the argument on tech, which I think this debate should have moved a lot into previously. I think that the worst case scenario you have on our side is that you have a serious decline in the availability of people being able to have jobs. So, for example, things like artificial intelligence creates the ability for individuals to want to over-rely on technology. The impact that this is going to create, or the harm on our side, is that people are no longer going to have jobs because they're going to be replaced. But we think even if this occurs, the worst case scenario is that you have people having too much money. Because how are states responding now? States are responding to this threat by having things like universal basic income. So at the worst case scenario on our side, individuals have too much money that they are not able to spend. Maybe an inflation, we agree. But we don't think it creates stagnation. Why? Because for stagnation to occur, you need to couple inflation with a lack of production. But with the existence of AIs and AGIs, production is always going to exist. AIs are going to do all of the jobs. So even if we have an inflation, because production doesn't get stagnated in any likelihood in the next 100 years, we are not likely to have a stagnation, and that's essentially what our argument is. I'm not sure how much time I have. The last thing that we're going to do is just to reaffirm the things that you hear from Supernana. We've given you a lot of arguments. Things like cryptocurrency, things like people trying to form things like BRICS to counter failing dollars, are things that ensure that individuals are not going to just sit around and allow the failure of one country voting into Trump make all of us get fucked up at the end of the day. But the last thing that is here is just to mention that Supernana also talked to you about how we already have the ability to actually find resources. Because like I said, inflation can occur in the next 100 years. But we're never going to get to a point where we actively run out of production, given the fact that we're already exploring space to make sure that we still have things to get and things to import into this world that we live in at this point in time. What the good closing government team needs to do is to come back and prove that the harm is so dire that it's going to create a combination of two things: an inflation and a decline in production.
Thank you so much, Diallo, for that fine speech. To open the floor, let's welcome the member of government here.
Yeah, do you get the previous one? Did you get the previous speech? Hello. Sorry, please, you have a POI. I'll prioritize opening, asking you a final who's taking POI. So you're encouraged to your ask.
Yeah, guys.
So I begin my speech
In 3, 2, 1. At the end of this debate, the question you have to ask yourself is, why is it that there is a growing trend of inflation? Why is it that global inflation exists now? And all the information that Supernana says we have, and all the intelligent people in central banks and federal reserves that they claim we have not been able to find solutions, and this is it. Stagflation is nuanced. Stagflation has a lot of criticalities there, meaning that even if you do nominal things like they would, which is increase interest rates to tackle inflation, there's a resultant effect that will probably harm the economy, that will probably be even much more disastrous. What we posit on our side, and is to answer the question that we posited in the first place, is that the reasons why the smartest people in the central banks and all those people that they say are going to manage the systems to curb these issues have been handcuffed because of the fact that political interest often trumps economic interest in several instances. It is very simple. The government, which controls the monetary fiscal policies, do not always align with the monetary policies. And we think that this trend is even much more likely going to continue in 100 years for a couple of reasons. They say, look, I don't think we need to be about African leaders per se,
But I think that even for the best leaders in the best nation, Joe Biden, etc., are people who often always prioritize political interests. I mean, it makes no sense for the US to be in so much debt, for people to be suffering in the poorest slums in Baltimore and all those places. Yet they are funding Israel, spending so much money to fund Israel. They are suffering one of the worst inflations probably in their history. Yet because of political interest, they are doing all the things that they say a smart leader wouldn't do. It means because of the reason that they know they themselves, Elon Musk and the rest, would be insulated from all those particular kind of issues. They will do it as long as it furthers their political and other interests that they prioritize over economic interests. Why is it likely going to continue for like the 100 years? You also have to ask yourself a question. Why is it that almost every election that comes up, it seems like it's the most important election ever? Because there is a recognition of how important politics has become. Ghana, Nigeria, the USA. There's an importance of how these political leaders want like power, or how they want to utilize these kind of things. We think this kind of trend is going to continue because of the fact that in the world that is to come, there's like probably a lot more like that these particular people will be able to gain in terms of being in power or being in those particular control of these particular kind of resources. But secondly, it's things like, you know, the weaponization of ideologies, the weaponization of things like false news or false media and all those particular things to ensure that they remain in power and all this in all these regards. But thirdly, is the idea that these particular people want to entrench power for a long period of time. That's why you see Project 2025 and all these particular things existing. It means in the majority of instances, the trend of political interest trumping monetary interest is likely going to continue. What is the impact? The impact here is that, first of all, even the people with the best interest in the central bank and federal reserves, no matter what they do, as long as government spending isn't necessarily in their control, no matter how smart those people are in federal reserves or maybe the EU central bank, if Angela Merkel, or it's not Angela Merkel, but if all the political leaders still make silly decisions like sponsoring Israel or making those kind of huge kind of money spending because of political interest, it would still diminish all those particular kind of good that they probably do. But secondly, it means that even all the call-outs that they tell you about wouldn't necessarily work. I mean, they've been calling out like the US government on the war of Palestine. People have been calling them out. Information asymmetry doesn't work here because they will still prioritize their political interests primarily. Second case in this debate, I think it is smart to say that, oh, we're moving away from the US. I'm going to prove two things. One, we're still going to be largely dependent on US currency and how that's going to be problematic. Secondly, how even things like BRICS are nonsensical. Several reasons why BRICS wouldn't necessarily work in this case scenario. Firstly, is that whoever that is asked.
Alright, so I'm unsure how the downfall of the United States is going to affect the entire global population, owing to the fact that alternative exists all across the world for nation itself.
Exactly. So I think the thing that they miss on their side is that it's not just about like the US, it's about the criticality of the dollar. The comparison between BRICS and the dollar, for instance, is that BRICS hasn't even gotten the kind of standing it needs to be as stable for people to trust it, one, for people to continuously bank on it. But best case scenario, if people bank on it as much as they say, it will probably even strain its ability to be able to be as self-sustaining for a long time. It looks like the BRICS Bank, for instance, wanted to respond and take over the role of the World Bank, which is dollar-dominated, or taking over the role of the IMF, which is dollar-dominated, which will put that strain on it that it doesn't probably have to be able to withstand that length of time. But a couple more things like cryptocurrency, people don't trust it enough. Things like security issues come out of that. But secondly, is that most of the countries whose aggregate currencies will make up those alternatives, countries like Russia, like China, also have struggling currencies as well because of the war they're involved with, because of the sanctions that they're involved in. It means all those alternatives, even if you say that is what you posit, it's still going to be problematic and it's still going to likely cause this kind of issues. How is the US dollar still going to be relevant and why is that problematic? Firstly, because of how intrinsic it is to things like the stock markets, things like the stock exchange market, where multinationals, literally their FDI is dependent on dollar, how they like put things into your country. The kind of debts that most countries take, it's like mostly like circulated or mostly like done in dollars. But thirdly, the pseudo like imagination that the dollar is always strong, which means people are much more likely going to like lean on it. Even though I mean like literally the World Bank has been releasing reports of how problematic it will be in the long term for the dollar. But people still bank on it because of how intertwined it is in the world today. It's going to be difficult in 100 years for you to say, oh, we're just going to eliminate it from our reserves. Even China, that's identical to the US, still has dollar in their reserves today. What does this then mean? it means that if the dollar is as critical as it probably is, it's as crucial to several economies as are proven. But lastly, on the idea of climate change, and we have to contribute to this clash, I think the thing we need to show you is that it wouldn't just be multiple resources, because in 100 years, we wouldn't use oil as much, because climate change will be so disastrous, because we've seen the harms that oil and all those particular things have caused. It means we'll be dependent on alternatives like green energy and all that. These guys have done a good job in telling you now will be more difficult, because we won't be able to get as much lithium as we used to. It then means that energy costs are going to be so much worse. If you do not have, you probably won't be able to use oil when the place is so devastated because of oil itself. It means energy costs rising because we need more solar panels, we need all these kind of things. It wouldn't necessarily be able to incorporate that within that short space of time, or to incorporate that in a way that is effective for multiple countries. It means in that particular case scenario where energy is very, very critical, several countries and several people wouldn't necessarily be able to afford that cost at that point in time. Primarily in this debate, what you must understand is the reason why stagflation will probably exist and why it will exist for such a long time is because there's a growing trend of political interest trumping over the best economic experts in countries. But secondly and importantly, is that even alternatives that exist are problematic, they're not strong enough. But clearly, even when they exist, people will still hold on to the dollar, which would ensure that their economies necessarily face constraints in that period of time. Lastly, energy costs are going to worsen. We wouldn't have much business of energy, very proud.
Thank you, member of government, for that fine speech. Now let's have the member of opposition take here.
Okay. Great. Can you hear me?
Yes, please go ahead.
That's JK. What's up? What's up? I think you're in
Just don't call. Let me call WhatsApp. Or say WhatsApp and WhatsApp for now.
Yeah, what's up, JK? Yeah, what's up, JK? JK. I'm good?
Yeah.
One moment. Right, let's go. I'm going to start my speech in 3. Sorry. Let me start my speech now. I'm going to explain simply why we're in this debate. Opening government's case was that economies have risk, at risk. They never really explain why this will lead to stagflation. Probably opening opposition is correct. Secondly, the problem with opening opposition, in any case, we have alternative ways to react to this. Not really going to explain why the alternative is sufficient as a response, or why it will be sufficient in the next 100 years. But note, opening opposition's case is just, a break. It's not really going to reverse what opening government says, but probably just to mitigate the risk. What we are going to do in extension, because CG is quite similar to opening government, if you look at the note, what we're going to do in closing opposition is explain why the trend of the world is not going to be to stagflation. All we just have to prove is that probably we get a recession. Concede that even if opening government is correct, that the risks that we discussed lead to the global economy crumbling. But secondly, yes, we'll be very charitable as well to also be able to explain or flip the material about climate change and why it doesn't lead to sort of outcomes that we discussed. And the first part, the extension, then why are we unlikely to get stagflation, and in the worst case of the government, we're going to have the full-on recession for the next 100 years. Note then that there are currently wars that exist within the global economy. Firstly, China as a threat to the countries in Southeast Asia, like Taiwan, for example, plans to invade Taiwan in 2050. Much more likely with the United States becoming more increasingly closer to Taiwan. Important then as well, in order for the Chinese Communist Party to remain in power, after she has left probably by that time as well. Additionally, also the increasing threat, within the South China Sea, China versus the Philippines and Japan, Korea, for example. This is not just limited to China. Also, Israel and the repercussions of the actions of Israel in Palestine is going to linger on for years. Also, Russia and its Soviet expansionism. Finally, as well, Russia, the sort of proxy wars that exist within the Middle East. All of this proves that we are on the tipping point of global conflict. This means that in the next 20, 50 years, in the next 100 years, we are going to keep on fighting wars. We're going to be on a full-blown war between countries that exist within the global economy. This means that we are going to have recession in the worst-case scenario, which means countries are not producing. It's not just that people have enough to demand, not just that people are demanding so much, but that you have the global economy going down and people not having as much purchasing power because they are displaced by the very mechanism of war and conflict happening within the global economy. This is the worst case of what opening government analyzed that there is. What we explain here is the risk leads to that tipping point of people not having purchasing power, so you don't have a stagflation, and the worst case scenario is a recession. This is the first part, the extension. The second thing then is that possibly people don't get a recession. What you have then is that you don't have the second aspect, which is that you have enough goods that is going on, and you have the increasing production capacity of countries. This is true, because if countries do not go to war for all of the reasons identified, they compete positively. So if there's no risk to the bottom, probably there's a risk to the top. And this is likely because of China and the United States, competing who first gets to Mars, for example, and is able to colonize, in terms of technology, able to have access to technology. This is why you have, a global competition or global race for semiconductors, and that's why Taiwan is strategically important to the ambitions of both China and the United States. This is also why, China is increasingly angry with countries like South Korea and how they are able to supply, semiconductor chips, because that's the landscape, that's the new frontier of development. It is technology. So given that there is competition on this level, it is the production capacity is not just reliant on companies or corporations, for example, that are vulnerable to shocks, which means that states in themselves are competing in a way that means that you're going to have jobs for individuals. But beyond this as well, that you increase the production capacity for the next 100 years based on the competitive incentive of these countries as well. This means to the greatest, what happens on our side is that you reverse the opening government discussions. Probably people have enough money, there's enough goods to cater for this, you don't have stagflation. This is what the second part of this extension plays. Before I continue, very happy to take CG.
Alright, so what you're doing is playing around semantics. Recession could be a characteristic of stagflation, the same way inflation could be a characteristic of stagflation.
I'm not the one who said emotion. Stagflation is described as people having so much money and there not being not enough goods. We already explained is that probably there's not enough goods, people don't have enough money as well to be able to buy those goods, so there's no stagflation. Probably there is enough money and people have enough goods to be able to purchase, that's not stagflation. Secondly then, as the second part of this extension, when we flip all the things that we already discussed, climate change, first and foremost. What they say under this is that we have climate change, finite resources, etc., etc. People have so much money not going to be able to purchase goods. Climate change is going to lead to worse outcomes in humanity. Two things then. People are going to die, which is that people are not going to live as long, which means that you're going to be able to open the market for people to be able to access jobs. Climate change is going to displace people, which means you have to create alternative products. So it means that there's a pressure on countries in order for them to be able to create alternative products in order for people to be able to survive. So this means that there is resilience that countries need to build in as much as they recognize that they need to respond to climate change. So that process of resilience building creates alternative products, but also the consequences of climate change necessitates economic improvement in as much as more people need to be able to access jobs as well. But finally, more people are able to access jobs as well. Finally then, in terms of technology, the claim on this bench is that technology leads to the replacement of human beings. What opening opposition response to is presumably that that sort of replacement that happens is something that is good as a shock, as a mitigator. What we say here in closing opposition is that technology and the transition of technology in the next 100 years is going to lead to the transition of jobs. So we're going to have new jobs replace old jobs that exist within the market. This extension is proven. It's I don't know what the time is. Please, can someone tell me what the time is?
1 minute.
Okay, sure, let's go. The final part of this extension then is the stock market and retail investment. And I think this is important because note then that given the experiences with the 2008 financial crisis, etc.,
and the rise in retail investment, which is like a lot of individuals that exist on the ground engaging in retail investment. It means that we're not vulnerable to the global shocks that happen when companies are have abstract value within the stock market, which means that they're able to pump their value using the stock market. Given that more individuals have more information about how these things work in and of itself, more individuals have more information about how these things work and are able to engage adequately within the stock market. This mitigates the incentive for companies not to build actual products and rely on the stock market in order for them to be able to make value for themselves, which is that this diminishes their short-term incentive because they know that if they do this, people are aware, so they don't want to do this anyway. On our side, what it means is that with the rate in which people engage with the stock market, you create an incentive for companies to engage in creating actual value, in creating actual products, in employing actual people, as opposed to relying on the stock market to pump their value and in order for them to be able to take loans from banks. All of this extension has proven that the risk on their side is not going to create stagflation, but the risk that they point out as well in the second part of the extension are reasons why we're not going to have stagflation. For all of these reasons, closing opposition is clearly one is wrong.
Thank you so much, member of opposition, for that fine speech. Now let's have the government whip to round up closing government case. Here.
Vicky, we are ready for you.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to, obviously I'm going to take any QI. Oh, I'm going to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Okay, so panel, let's go over what's causing this claim debate and why it's most important thing in the public debate. I think firstly, when we talk to you about how political interest is always from economic interest. What this means is that if you look at the vulnerable states of the world, with basically the wars going on and how political countries have to actually align with several interests. Most of the time, this comes even economic interest and preserving these resources that are already tapped in the country of this state, right? So this looks like the United States using billions of dollars to fund Israel when they're already in so much debt. But the reason why this is also more terrible is the fact that we live in a world where I think that in established where resources are not finite, right? People are having less children, but also resources are continually being diminished, right? Wars are happening. Climate change is literally wiping out entire states at the same time. Why this thing is important is that we are going to reach a point that we cannot innovate faster than the harms that are happening. Because if you look at even the way the climate change issue has been happening, right? Even when we want to do stuff we are trying to innovate green tech, we see that the climate change harms are more drastic than the innovation that is happening. So we think that all the political interest and the unique state of the world is one that is going to lead to itself in 100 years, basically. So a state of deplorable recession in 100 years with no resources. I think we need to talk about this before, right? We think that with the way wars are happening, and apart from the political interests that are aligning, it also looks like wars having resources, including even transport routes, right? That literally, you would see that particular countries are not allowed to fly into airspace of some other countries. Also, it includes road transportation, all these things. What this means is that it stifles the way economic growth happens. Because for economic growth to happen, there needs to be interdependence of countries with economic trade and stuff like that. With an increase in war and the way war has affecting the global climate right now, we predict that this is going to lead to an extreme recession whereby economic resources are going to be very scarce. The next thing I talk about was the US dollars, right? We think that with the way the US dollars is being it's being hampered on, and like I know opposition argues that we have alternatives, we have people like BRICS, all these things, right? But we don't think that these alternatives are like viable. Why? Because if you look at BRICS right now, I mean, even the United States is heavily clamping on them. The United States actually said they are not going to trade with BRICS countries if they decide to make an alternate currency to the dollar, right? So we are not actually seeing a viable alternative other than the dollar because of obviously the heavy calm down of the West. So we think that even if this will continue to fight through this, the global economies are still linked to the US dollar. What this means is that a form of the US dollar is a form of like global economy in like long run, and so obviously leading to like a long-term recession. We also think that the whole thing about from closing government that they say that there's going to be new jobs and there's going to be new innovation. It's not going to happen, right? Because we think that this process from closing government takes a lot of time, right? And especially it's a lot of time that cannot be able to catch up with the harms that's already happening, right? That my partner has chosen up to you, even you in this state. What this means that is that crime is still more likely to occur than an unlikely side from closing government that says that they are going to do things like create new jobs and create new jobs and have more innovation. We don't think that this is going to magically happen. But also, I think state government is highly semantics, right? Because they talk about the worst case scenario that's going to happen is inflation. We think that inflation can be part of stagflation. That's the thing. It's just a characteristic of the same thing that's happening. What it means is that closing government is considering to our case. They're just trying to play around with and saying that this part will happen, but this other part will not happen. We don't think that that's particularly fair within the purview of this debate, right? The next thing then to talk about is the comparison between our closing government and opening government. So I think opening government gives things like we have things like disease is happening at such a fast rate. We think this was already responded to obviously because if they say diseases if they were able to deal with COVID-19, that means we are able to deal with that. But I think the most important thing right now is to show the selfish interest of countries who are the most safe in whatever happens in the global stage, right? So which means that if we are able to prove what these incentives are for these countries and why they are likely to act a particular way, we think that closing government is still more relevant. Within the purview of this debate, right? The next thing to talk about is how also we talk about the issues about war and the transport routes that are going to be affected. This also goes to show you how this cycle trade. I think trade is heavily linked to the way economies are able to grow. So if you can show that trade is not occur, it means that we are able to claim the fact that economies are not able to grow on their side of the world, which means that we are giving obviously the most important impact within the culture of this debate. I think what you must join this debate on is the side of the world that is more likely to occur, right? I think outside is more practical. We show you what's actually happening within this world. We are not opposition side that say, we may create new jobs, we may create new innovation. We think we are able to show you after things that's happening now and how that gets exacerbated to reach that point in 100 years where there is a point of no return. We are very proud to propose.
Thank you so much, Godfrey, for that fine speech. To round up the entire debate, let's have the opposition speak here.
Yeah. So, I think you can sit here, right? You can sit there and speak.
I want to keep you up. Is that right? Are you ready?
Yes.
Start to my Second, I'm going to take this ahead of the position to why we win over the season. But before that, a couple of questions about our to page. Notice that the entire government page runs on argument, right? You can credit like calling for this specific argument. Number one is about political interest. That also flows into the argument when the talks about military conflict exists. I want to go to how this argument itself doesn't actually make sense. Recognize from Collins' analysis how these states in and of themselves form more of war and form more of military affairs warfare as opposed to looking at the welfare of their people. We think that even if this will concede that these issues and these problems don't exist in the status quo, lay emphasis on the after analysis gave like the United States. We think already in the world we're living in the status quo, there are alternative and mitigating policies that exist. That is why when the United States consistently followed their military in the Middle East and in Afghanistan, there was a massive protest and a revolt in the Senate that saw Trump pulling out their troops in Afghanistan and in the Middle East because a lot of money is being put into those military affairs, keeping those guys in the Middle East. It means that the alternative for state to be called out by these people largely exists, meaning that amount of problems they pointed out on their side of the house can exist. But secondly, and very important, we see how states in and of themselves that have alternative priority that in itself doesn't align with the interests of their people are likely being held to account. We saw the incident of Kenya calling like their senators and being able to storm their parliament and create for change. We saw Ghana protests and all of those things. It means that alternative already exists in the status quo to handle those problems they talk about. But even in the instances where you don't buy this analysis at its best score, we think that what will result is the failure of these very states in and of themselves. It doesn't trickle down to the failure of all states across the world. This debate is about the global failure. They haven't proven how the action and the failure of one actor is going to be a resultant factor to the failure of almost all actors in the world. We continuously ask POY to adapt Collins as to how the failure of the United States is likely going to affect the whole world, owing to the fact that the world has already gone to the point that alternative has largely existed. He ultimately was grossly flippant about that. We don't think that that response was sufficient. But again, on the idea of like the dollar, like exclusively including government, right? Recognize how that can never be a contention in the debate. Why? Because like open opposition talks to you about, there has been a narrative and it's like a continuous like reforms in terms of like countries being able to de-dollarize, right? Yes, this is very important. We are seeing countries like very small countries like Brazil and South Africa calling out the United States and being able to de-dollarize their economies. It means that so many world and so many actors have begun to shift the currency pegging they have from the United States to alternative means of exchange. That simply means that the failure of the United States, even in that 100 years, is ultimately not going to be as massive as they portray it to lead to things like stagflation on our side of the house. We say that because alternative and the evolutionary consciousness of human society we live in has made nations to ultimately to alternative ways to sustain their economies as opposed to being an underdog and more likely being subservient to a particular actor that has the capacity to fail. We think that these alternatives are things that are very, very crucial. They never analyze why these alternatives are not sufficient anymore and why the absence of these alternatives are likely going to lead to the victory that they're going to celebrate on their side of the house. The next biggest clash on their world is the clash on climate change. Recognize when they say, that nations are beginning to divert their attention from things like traditional base, like things like crude and burning of fossil fuel, to things like greener energy, renewable energy, and to one extent, some nations are likely going to stack these particular things and really likely want to make it close open. The reason why this thing of itself isn't true is on three fronts. One, majority of nations are becoming conscious of tech evolution. That is why some of you seated here judging this debate more likely read things like law, read things like English and literal studies, but you're more likely diving into things like tech, graphic design, and all of those things as a means like copywriting and script writing, right? As a means to sustain yourself because of the evolutionary consciousness of technology. It means that those traditional practices, even in the absence of code, nations are beginning to develop alternative ways, tech ways of sustaining their world. In their world, they say many nations don't have like this, like renewable energies, like solar and all of those things. That is not true. So many nations are creating institutions that are into these reforms, being able to establish their own renewable form of energy and all of those things. The absence of this alternative is the worst of our own one. But they have found to prove how this alternative inherently doesn't exist on our world. We think that this argument is very, very crucial. You must look at this argument at the end of the day. But secondly, we think that the existence of this, this renewable energy that exists literally all across the board is something that in itself makes no sense on our side of the house. How? In their world, they said because of climate change, things like, tides, ocean, and all of those things that exist, right? We say, yes, we brought your argument, right? But even though that needs to exist, and will continue to exist, can never lead to speculation. But most importantly, nations are already beginning to mind the way they explore gases and ultimately how they use fossil fuel. But at its best core, nations that are inherently cool are inherently into this reform system of being able to use things like solar panel because of the Paris Agreement and other conventions that exist all across the world that mandate them to do that and have forced them to do that. It means that because of these forms of reforms and this mandatory structure that already exists based on treaties and conventions, nations are being conscious not to go against these conventions. But at their core, they also say states like the United States will always want to go against these conventions, right? We think even if they do and continuously do that on their side of the house, culpability exists on their side of the house, and even at its worst case, they are more likely going to go into things like recession. Again, they ought to prove how the recession of the United States currently in the world in which we live now is going to affect the whole world. Last thing you must note is that why the Great Depression exists and how it affected the world was then. The world was likely crude then. Alternative never existed. Massive amount of alternatives were not in existence as of then. That was why it has so much impact on the world. But in the world in which we live in, the human society in which we live in, massive amount of alternatives currently exist, meaning that nations can self-sustain. We're incredibly proud.
Thank you so much, opposition lead, for that fine speech, and thank you everyone else for that very fine debate. The panel will discuss and will be back in move for the Thank you. Come be a tech white brother.
Is this the one? I have no idea. My boy Tom. I have no idea.
Come be a tech white boy.
Alright, let's do top 10 speakers. And
Yes, from here. Zero. You want to take this? Speakers are on. Speakers are on.